Welcome to another episode of Mormon Discovery. Today we take a shallow swim into the world of psychology and examine an interesting phenomenon in the brain, a cognitive distortion that twists our perception of reality, and where we see that most often in Mormondom. First, a quick update on my church discipline for those who are interested. There really isn't an update. After months of threatening to excommunicate me or take disciplinary action against me for these videos, there have now been months of silence. I haven't been called back into the stake president's office since just before my daughter's birthday when he told me I would not be able to baptize her unless I deleted my videos and publicly state that I no longer believe what I said. At long last, I finally told him I'd be willing to delete the videos if he'd let me baptize my daughter, but that he can't change what I believe. As you remember from my last videos, that was not enough for him. So my father performed her baptism, thank you, Pops, and I stood in as a witness. Since then, I think realizing he doesn't really have the grounds to excommunicate me and knowing there's no other way he can bully me or threaten me, the stake president's kind of just let it go. Until a few weeks ago. My son just turned 12 at the end of December and in January was ready to be ordained a deacon. This is something he wanted to do, so I was supportive. And he went in for an interview with the bishop who invited me in to listen, and it was a good interview. In fact, I really appreciated that the bishop let me sit in. That the bishop told my son he should always come to talk to me first with spiritual or personal questions, and I wasn't uncomfortable with really anything that the bishop taught him. That's pretty cool of him, actually, because he obviously knows my situation, so to point my son to me first instead of him or to other church leaders, knowing that I'm pretty much an apostate, I thought that was very considerate and respectful. Thank you, Bishop. Now, here's the only real update. After the interview, the bishop excused my son and asked to speak to me for a moment. He told me that the stake president emailed him saying that I am under no circumstances allowed to ordain my son. No action is being taken against me. I was never asked to relinquish my temple recommend or stop taking the sacrament, but just to stick it to me, the good old president refused to let me ordain my son. I was permitted to stand in the circle and use my priesthood, but I guess my priesthood isn't good enough to have words come out of my mouth. Weird. It was good, though. His deacon's quorum advisor was the voice and gave him a beautiful blessing. I was touched by his sincerity and the words he spoke. Thank you for your goodness, Dwayne. Thou art the man. And I say that the way that Brother Joseph said it to Newell K. Whitney, not the way the prophet Nathan said it to King David. Well, with all that said, let's move on to the real reason we're here today. Today's topic, emotional reasoning. I chose this topic for many reasons. First, because of the large number of people that have come to me after listening to my videos who agree with everything or almost everything that I say. They say something like, you're absolutely right. You just can't argue with your logic. You cover every angle. Very well done. But I still believe that God speaks with President Nelson daily. He is a true prophet. I feel it. Or, I never knew the stuff you point out in your videos, but I've checked and it's true. It's actually accurate. I just don't like your conclusions about the information. It makes me uncomfortable. This comment was great. I started listening to your videos, but got scared and turned it off. I don't want to lose my testimony of what I know is true. What? Or my brother who refuses to listen because he knows what he knows and he knows that God knows it. Learning new information about the origin of the church and its doctrines doesn't change what he feels. The commonality here is that all these people have felt the church is true. Or as they'd probably describe it, the Holy Ghost has touched them in such a way that they can't deny the church is true. Their feelings mean it's true. The truthfulness of the claims we make as a religion is based on how they feel about them. Now, there's several problems with this. One of them is that emotional reasoning is not only a poor guide to truth, but it's also emotionally unhealthy, and what psychologists call a cognitive distortion. Let's look at some examples first before we dig into the research. Last month at Sacrament meeting, a very nice fellow in the ward gave a rather bland talk. I actually don't remember what it was about, but I do remember how he finished in standard Mormon fashion with his testimony. He told us how he gained his testimony. He was serving a mission in Canada. It was winter and it was freezing. As he explained, the locals build fires in their homes to stay warm, but they don't buy pre-chopped wood. They buy these huge logs that are delivered to their home, and then they chop it up as needed. Well, an elderly gentleman in his ward bought such a log and was unable due to his age and physical condition to chop it up. So on P-Day, our speaker, his companion, and several ward members went to the old man's house to chop up the log. The spirit of charity, brotherly kindness, and friendship enveloped the young testimonialess elder. He felt so good about what the ward was doing and how he was involved. Trying to quote him as best as I can remember, he said, "The spirit of charity was so strong. It was the best P-Day. And at that moment, I knew the church was true. That experience is how I gained my testimony. This is God's kingdom on earth. I felt it then, and I know it now." What horrendous reasoning. What a bizarre conclusion to draw from that experience. What a strange leap of logic. What a weird jump to make from a nice experience to this is God's church. I felt really good chopping wood with my friends, so I know that Joseph Smith restored God's church. How do you even connect those two? The only way that's possible is if you've been taught that this is the correct way to discover truth. If you've been taught that emotional reasoning is the one way to accurately determine what's fact and what's fiction. This may sound odd, but it's very similar to how President Henry J., not Henry B., but how Henry J., this is Henry Jr., son of Henry B., president of BYU Idaho, Henry J. Eyring gained his testimony. In a fall 2018 devotional to BYU Idaho students on how to combat doubts, President Eyring called it Gaining and Strengthening Testimony. There's a link in the comments about it. P. Eyring testified like this: "I'm grateful to testify of the truthfulness of the restored gospel of our Savior Jesus Christ. I was blessed to gain my testimony of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints when I was very young. I vividly recall talking with my mother one Sunday night as she sat next to the bathtub in which my younger brother Stuart and I were bathing. That tells you how young I must have been because I didn't mind sharing my bath with Stuart." Okay, pause real quick. He's like 3 or 4, sharing a tub with his brother. And we know he's not older than 4 from his next sentence. "Earlier in the day, my Sunbeam teacher," remember, Sunbeams are 3 and 4, "had taught me about the celestial kingdom. Somehow, I got the idea that getting into the celestial kingdom would be very difficult. That made me worry that I might not qualify. Sitting there in the tub that night, I looked up and asked my mother, 'Will I go to the celestial kingdom?' I remember her serious, confident look as she said, 'Yes, you will.' Mother responded so surely that it made me wonder if getting into the celestial kingdom was easy. I decided to test her on this point. I asked, 'Will Stuart get in?' 'Yes,' she replied, 'Stuart will too.'" That's it. That's when P. Eyring Jr. gained his testimony from his mother, knowing that he would make it into the celestial kingdom when he was 4. There's no way that she could know that when he's 4, what kind of a guy he's going to grow up to be. You can't know that at 4, and you can't know that to the close of his life. But just a sentence or two later, he says, "She was right, Stuart's getting in, and I'm getting in." Apparently, it's already done. It's accomplished. B, more importantly, his testimony is based off how he felt when his mom told him that day when he was 4 that he and his brother were going to heaven. This testimony is based entirely on emotion, based on the connection he made with his mother that day, feeling her approval of him as a child, and somehow from that he knows that there is a God, and that God appeared to Joseph Smith in 1820, and that God established the only true church in existence. This is emotional reasoning. If it feels good, it's true. Forget the facts. If it makes you uncomfortable, it's false. Forget the facts. He drives the point home in his very next story, and I won't skip a single line of the story, so you know I'm not taking anything out of context. "Mother was right about Stuart. He is my parents' bishop and a wonderful husband and father. Stuart is on track for the celestial kingdom. I am trying to stay on track as well. My testimony of the church hasn't faltered since Mother first told me that it is true, yet I have not been immune to challenges and have at times struggled to defend my faith. A particularly unsettling challenge came when I was a young law clerk. A supervisor who knew of my church membership told me that new research had invalidated the Book of Abraham. I was shaken by that accusation, but I felt confident in a secret weapon. My father had recently been called as a general authority. I was sure that he would have arguments to counter those I faced at work. It was in such a state of confidence that I called my father on the phone. I described my situation and eagerly awaited his answer. I was sure that he would refute the accusations about the Book of Mormon, but his answer surprised me. He simply asked, "Have you read the Book of Abraham?" "Yes," I replied. He asked, "How do you feel when you read it?" "Good," I admitted. "What else do you need to know?" he asked. Now remember, this is the president of an institution of higher learning, telling young adults that the only correct way to know what's true is to determine if it feels good. And this instruction he received from a general authority who's now in the first presidency of the church. This man is training kids to know how to overcome their doubts in the church. That's the purpose of the talk. And his advice is if it doesn't make you feel good, it's false. And if it feels good, it's true. The problem is when you've cherished a belief for 20 plus years of your life and somebody shows up and tells you that this belief that you find so important in your life, in your community, in your family is not true, that's going to make anyone uncomfortable. No matter if they're Scientologists, Muslims, Jews, Mormons, or the 6-foot-tall Quakers Joseph Smith saw living on the moon. Nobody likes to be told that they're wrong, especially when the thing that they were wrong about is something that's so important to them, that they see as part of them. You see, Mormons view the gospel not as a thing in their lives, it is their lives. This is who they are. Back when we were allowed to use the word Mormon, how many talks were given about, "I'm a Mormon, I know it, I live it, I love it," or "Dare to be a Mormon, dare to stand alone, I am a Mormon," etc. So when somebody shows up and says, "Hey, this belief you have is incorrect," what we are hearing as Mormons is, "Hey, you are incorrect, you are false, who you think you are is wrong." It's dang near impossible to separate the two. That's part of why people get so defensive when you try to tell them you no longer believe in this thing. You are telling them that who they are is wrong. And that's not a comfortable thing to hear. It doesn't feel good. And so they say, "No, you are wrong. Satan has a hold of your heart and you're going to hell, you evil apostate." Let's listen to another very educated Mormon recently feed us the same line of reasoning which the church wants us to use to find truth. Elder Lawrence E. Corbridge of the 70 gave a devotional on January 22nd called "Stand Forever." Now, Elder Corbridge has a bachelor's degree and a Juris Doctorate degree, both from BYU. He specializes in commercial and business law. He's no dummy. Church-wise, he's very important too. He served as a mission president, bishop, stake president, and now in the 70. Lawrence tells us that he was recently given an assignment to read a great deal of material antagonistic to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the prophet Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, and the events of the Restoration. There may not be anything out there of that nature I haven't read. Since that assignment changed, I have not returned to wallow in that mire again. The next line he says is where it gets interesting. Reading that material always left me with a feeling of gloom, and one day that of darkness inspired me to write a partial response to all such antagonistic claims. Again, you see, he felt uncomfortable with that material to the point where he said it made him feel a sense of gloom and darkness. He'd have you believe that was the spirit of Satan infused into the work that he was reading. But could it be that he found evidence suggesting, perhaps strongly convincing him, that what he always thought was true was false? Or as I stated above, that who he thinks he is based on untruths? That would leave anyone gloomy. But instead of doing the intellectually honest thing and checking those claims or analyzing each piece of evidence he was confronted with, as you would expect a well-educated man like himself to do, he says it left him gloomy and dark. So he flatly rejected the information presented to him and decided to write a rebuttal, a defense of his comfortable beliefs based on his feelings. Not a defense where he shows counter-arguments, contradictory evidence, confirmatory witnesses to his beliefs, but a defense based on his emotional reasoning, and then goes on to tell us that we should do the same. Please follow closely here, because what he outlines here is the only method the church ever uses to convince its followers of their truth claims. This is the playbook. He starts by telling us what knowledge is and how to obtain it, the only way to obtain it. Truth enables us to see clearly because it is the knowledge of things as they really are, and as they were, and as they are to come. Knowledge is crucial to avoid deception, to discern between truth and error, and to see clearly and chart a course through the hazards of our day. Okay, so far I can't say I disagree. I'd word those sentences a little differently, but I don't object yet. It's his next statement where he loses me. Knowledge is revelation. And it's bolded in the article, emphasized in his speech. This is the whole purpose of the talk. Who cares what the evidence says? It doesn't matter how ridiculous some truth claims may be. If it feels right, or as in our last two examples, if you felt good even while thinking about the church, then it is true. If revelation, if emotionally you felt it's true, it's true. The church loved this talk and it was quick to reprint it everywhere. Right after he gave it, LDS Living picked it up, and even the Church News reprinted it the same day. The Church News altered a little of what he said to try to make it fit the playbook a little better. So the next section is like this in the Church News. There are three major methods of learning: scientific, analytical, and academic. But the divine method of learning incorporates elements of the other methodologies and ultimately trumps everything else by tapping into the powers of heaven. The first time I read that, I was at my son's basketball practice, and I literally laughed out loud. Coach looked at me like I was crazy, sitting there on the sideline. They say there's three kinds of learning, but a fourth kind we're going to create and name divine trumps the rest of them. So it matters not if scientifically, analytically, and academically you can prove a church truth claim to be false. That doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. We're going to discard that. If through this divine method you feel that your claim is true, you can toss all the rest of that evidence and rest assured that your illogical belief is true based on your emotional reasoning. It gets even sillier as it goes on. It's shocking. It shouldn't be. We should be used to this by now, but I'm still amazed that these academics try to put forth such awful, logically backwards arguments devoid of reason. But I have to remember, reason is unimportant. Feelings are what matters. Here's why I say it gets sillier. He then gives a brief explanation of what each method of reasoning is, but he tries to show that each method really should be the divine method, revelation. So to explain the scientific method, he points to 4 scriptures to show how science is used to find truth, using Alma, who instructs his readers to experiment upon my words and exercise a particle of faith. Yea, even if ye can no more than desire to believe, let this desire work in you, even until ye believe in a matter that ye can give place for a portion of my words. So Lawrence thinks, because he used the word experiment, that this is now scientific. When if you look at what he's actually saying, again, it's just believe, have faith, and even if you just want to believe but don't really believe yet, that's good enough. That's better than actually finding evidence. That's scientific. Next is the analytical method. He describes by quoting the Doctrine and Covenants. Behold, you have not understood. You have supposed that I would give it unto you when you took no thought save it was to ask me. But behold, I say unto you that you must study it out in your mind. Then you must ask me if it be right. You see, we keep ending up in the same spot no matter what method he chooses. Ask God if it's true. You'll feel good. It's true. I'll finish the verse he was quoting because where he stopped there was a comma, not a period. So I'll finish the thought for him. And if it is right, I will cause that your bosom shall burn within you. Therefore you shall feel that it is right. At least Lawrence acknowledges in his last sentence of the analytical method that evidence and reason also play a role in preparing us to know the truth. Whew, at least he got that in there. Now on to the academic method. I'll quote every word of this section. The academic method, of course, involves study of the written word. Study as well is essential. Mormon said that the Word of God has a more powerful effect upon the minds of the people how we think than the sword, which might be the fear or threat of death, or anything else. The Word of God is more powerful than anything. It is more powerful than fear, addiction, pornography, or anything else. It stands to reason, therefore, that the Lord would say, treasure up in your minds continually the words of life. He also said, and whoso treasureth up my words shall not be deceived. You see, once again, the academic method is read the scriptures, and you'll know it's true. Then he moves on to the divine method, which is virtually indistinguishable from the other 3. You see, he makes them all the same. There is only one way to find truth of any kind. Ask God, search your feelings, to heck with the evidence. How do you feel? I won't belabor the point any longer by quoting 100 other general authorities or by finishing Lawrence's talk. You know this is how we operate. You've seen it. So let's get into why emotional reasoning is so unreliable. There are many reasons, but I'll focus today on some of the things I've recently learned from a book I just got done reading called The Coddling of the American Mind. Now, this is a must-read, just fantastic. Greg Lukianoff, not sure how to say his name. Greg is a graduate from American University and Stanford Law School and the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE. Co-author Jonathan Haidt has been named one of the top global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine and one of the top world thinkers by Prospect magazine. A social psychologist with degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and Yale and postdoctorate from the University of Chicago. Haidt is among the most cited researchers in political psychology and moral psychology. Let's just say he knows stuff. According to their research, which they put in the book, there are 9 major categories of cognitive distortions, things that we use to distort, twist reality, and make us believe something that is not true. Listed first of these 9 is emotional reasoning. In one sentence, they describe emotional reasoning as letting your feelings guide your interpretation of reality. Really quickly, the other 8 are catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, dichotomous thinking, mind reading, labeling, negative filtering, discounting positives, and blaming. Now, these distortions lead us to develop schemas that revolve around maladaptive core beliefs which interfere with realistic and adaptive interpretation of social situations. I'm going to read several paragraphs from their book that illustrate well why the way the church teaches us to think and to discover truth is so dangerously flawed. So this is straight from their book. Sages in many societies have converged on the insight that feelings are always compelling but not always reliable. Often they distort reality, deprive us of insight, and needlessly damage our relationships. Happiness, maturity, and even enlightenment require rejecting the untruth of emotional reasoning and learning instead to question our feelings. The feelings themselves are real, and sometimes they alert us to truths that our conscious mind has not noticed, but sometimes they lead us astray. Skipping ahead now, they're not talking about testimony building here per se, but it does apply directly. As I've dedicated years to the study of church history, the scriptures, our doctrines, and the state of the church today, I've discovered truths, evidence, and facts that have led me to some new realizations. I'm sure many of you listening have too. What's sad is that when we try to share our discoveries with our family and friends, most of them, almost all of them, shut us down. They do not even want to know what you've read, what you've discovered, what you've learned. They don't care. Again, it's irrelevant to them. In fact, it's scary. They don't want to hear it. It doesn't matter what you show them because they feel that they are correct, so they're not even interested in examining your claims. Think about this next section as you think about your friends and family who tell you they know their testimony is true, but know nothing about what you've come to discover through your research and don't care to know. There is no universally accepted definition of critical thinking, but most treatments of the concept include a commitment to connect one's claims to reliable evidence in a proper way, which is the basis of scholarship and is also the essence of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It is not acceptable for a scholar to say, "You have shown me convincing evidence that my claim is wrong, but I still feel that my claim is right, so I'm sticking with it." When scholars cannot rebut or reconcile disconfirming evidence, they must drop their claims or else lose the respect of their colleagues. As scholars challenge one another within a community that share norms of evidence and argumentation and that holds one another accountable for good reasoning, claims get refined, theories gain nuance, and our understanding of truth advances. But what would happen if some professors encouraged students to use distortions in our list above? I'll tell you what happens. You end up with Mormons and people of other faiths unwilling to use reason and logic. Feelings trump everything. John and Greg go on. Emotional reasoning is among the most common of all cognitive distortions. Most people would be happier and more effective if they did less of it. These next words would make a good response to my family members who have told me to stop talking religion with them, or who have labeled me an antichrist without even listening to my point of view. Some of them have not even opened up these videos, which I started in large part to help them see where I'm coming from. I didn't want to have to argue with them face to face. I knew we wouldn't get anywhere, so I thought I'd record these videos and put them online so they could at least listen and hear my perspective. Not interested. Not all of them. Some of them have listened and been supportive, but some have not even clicked on the first one. Here's the quote. The notion that an institution should protect all of its students from ideas that some of them find offensive is a repudiation of the legacy of Socrates, who described himself as the gadfly of the Athenian people. He thought it was his job to sting, to disturb, to question, and thereby to provoke his fellow Athenians to think through their current beliefs and change the ones they could not defend. You see, emotional reasoning isn't the only cognitive distortion the church promotes. I can identify several, as I'm sure you can, in the responses I receive from people who have long called me friend in our family. Dichotomous thinking is the next major one I see. It's all or nothing. You are with us or against us. There are saints and there are sinners. There's only two categories of everything, and I've been thrust into the latter camp in each of these categories. In their chapter called Witch Hunts, in a section called Solidarity or Diversity, Greg and John say this. Solidarity is great for a group that needs to work in unison or march into battle. Solidarity engenders trust, teamwork, and mutual aid. But it can also foster groupthink, orthodoxy, and a paralyzing fear of challenging the collective. Solidarity can interfere with the group's efforts to find truth. And the search for truth can interfere with the group's solidarity. We are saying that viewpoint diversity is necessary for the development of critical thinking, while viewpoint homogeneity, whether on the left or right, remember they're talking about campus politics, leaves a community vulnerable to groupthink and orthodoxy. This groupthink is so common in Mormonism and several other high-demand fundamentalist religions. We never even question what the Institute teaches us. It doesn't even cross Mormons' minds that there could be another way to think, or a different answer, or a better answer. Whatever the brethren say is from God, and any other way of thinking is not only wrong, it's bad. To us, there is only one way to do things. Let me give you two examples from my time as a seminary teacher. In my third year of teaching seminary, we were in the Old Testament. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. To prepare to teach my students, I enrolled in Hebrew classes during the summer. I took some online courses, watched some videos, checked out some books. My wife helped me. She bought me some flashcards. We studied together. I learned quite a bit very fast and was pleasantly surprised with how this new linguistic knowledge blessed my study of the Old Testament. So many things made much more sense to me, being able to understand the original words the authors used when writing the Old Testament. Plus, it was a lot of fun. So once the semester started, I decided to have the first 3 minutes of my class dedicated to Hebrew study. We would learn together some basic conversational Hebrew, some scriptural insights. As the kids came into class and they found their seats and waited for the bell, I'd usually have a word or two on the board or a handout at their seats that they could study. And then when the bell rang, we'd start our first 3 minutes of class studying together. Sometimes it was conversational, other times it would be a gospel insight or a scriptural nuance that non-Hebrew speakers wouldn't notice, and I loved it, and many of the students loved it too. I even told them that I would donate funds and raise money for the best Hebrew students to take a trip to the Holy Land with me at the end of the year to visit some of the sites we were studying and to prepare for the New Testament year. I coordinated with Scott and Maureen Proctor. You probably know them from Meridian Magazine. They're the founders and owners, to have them guide our tour through Jerusalem. And I reached out to Dan C. Peterson, the biggest name in Middle Eastern Studies at BYU, for help. It was a great year and it was going to turn out to be a fantastic summer. But my area director stopped by one day to watch my class and was not pleased with this new and different approach. He gave me a cease and desist letter, well, email actually, cease and desist, and told me I had to stop teaching Hebrew because it was a waste of valuable class time and that I needed to be dedicated to teaching the kids the principles of the gospel instead and helping them, most importantly, to feel the power of those principles. It was not about time, though, because, like I said, I spent 3 minutes a day on Hebrew, sometimes less, sometimes just a new word, while Brother Brad Smith next door, who was a local bishop at the time and veteran teacher right next door to me, same school, same area director, started class sometimes 10, 15 minutes late. He was notorious for it. A hour, the early hour, he'd show up halfway through class sometimes, and then he'd use his first hour prepping. during class. Not only that, he'd have these long, like 15, 20-minute student spotlights and would have kids come up and spotlight them. Very fun. And have long games on Friday. Now, I'm not opposed to highlighting our students or having fun in the class, letting kids enjoy their time at seminary. But if the issue was, as stated, I was wasting valuable time that needed to be used to teach our kids the precious principles of the gospel, why was Brad Smith free to waste all the class time he wanted? When he was observed, nothing was said. Being late is not an issue. Lots of teachers do that. Spotlights is not an issue. That's very common. Being a garbage teacher is also common. Teaching kids a biblical language to deepen their scriptural knowledge, not common. Not okay. Not what Mormons do. There's only one way to do things, and this is not it. Well, I had to stop teaching Hebrew, but so many students and parents reached out to me and asked me to continue that eventually I obliged. Now, when the area director found out, he had two problems with me. I was teaching Hebrew still, which he did not approve of, and I was defying his authority. He said he was appalled that a new teacher like me would dare to question his authority. That's almost a word-for-word quote. I wrote it in my journal that same day, so I know I'm not just twisting my memory of his words. Well, I had to cancel Hebrew and the field trip, of course. That was never going to fly. And before the end of the year, they canned me for being too unorthodox and rebellious. On to my other example, also while teaching the Bible. I like to leave BibleHub.com open on my computer to the chapter we were studying that day and have my computer connected to the overhead. BibleHub is fantastic. It has dozens of Bible translations available from King James, the Wycliffe Bible, Orthodox Jewish Bible, the International Version Bible, etc. The Purple Letter Bible is really cool. That highlights all references or allusions to God. And there are different interpretations and commentaries on every passage as well. It's incredible, wonderful resource. So whenever we came to a difficult to understand passage, I would turn on the projector, and there was BibleHub to see if maybe the American Standard Version would be easier for the student to understand. Or if there were a Mormon interpretation like the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph in Ezekiel 37, I'd say, take 4 to 5 minutes, open up your cell phones, go to BibleHub.com to better understand the section, and maybe see what other religions think about this verse. This is what we know it means through modern revelation, but let's see if we can understand how other religions view the same passage. What's their interpretation? I'm not sure why I thought I could get away with that, but they almost burned me at the stake for it. Showing kids that there was a different way to interpret the scriptures other than what Bruce R., James Faust, or Neil Maxwell have taught us? Never mind that we've had to disavow a lot of their teachings, which weren't even close to correct, but that's what we decided as a group was correct at the time, and so that's what we're sticking with. Until a new prophet is sustained, and he calls past prophets false prophets and tells us that they've offended God and we're helping Satan win with nicknames that he used, or by teaching that Adam was God, or whatever. My area director sounded an awful lot like the Wizard of Oz speaking to Elphaba in Wicked. The truth isn't a thing of fact or reason. It is simply what everyone agrees on. And that was what everyone agreed on. So I was out. Well, I still have lots to say. I'm skipping a lot in my material here from my notes, but I don't want to skip too much. One of the things I really wanted to cover was the salamander letter and some things connected to that and what that incident shows us about how unreliable the Holy Ghost is if used as our only source of knowledge, emotional reasoning. If that's all that we're using, how unreliable that really is. If used by itself, the Holy Ghost isn't a reliable source of truth to even the prophets, who are supposed to be more spiritually connected than the rest of us peons. So I'm going to conclude this episode today. We will have a part 2 very soon. Hopefully before the end of March, I'll have it out. But we'll conclude part 1 for now. So to close part 1 of this episode, I echo the words of Marcus Aurelius. If anyone can show me and prove to me that I am wrong in thought or deed, I will gladly change. I seek the truth, which never yet hurt anybody. It is only persistence in self-delusion and ignorance which does us harm. And by continually relying on emotional reasoning to guide our most important decisions, especially while refusing to even examine evidence that demonstrates that our positions are wrong, we persist in self-delusion and ignorance. Ben Shapiro probably says it most succinctly: facts don't care about your feelings. We'll continue next time with more about emotional reasoning and the exciting tale of the salamander letter. Don't miss it. So thank you for now for listening, and as always, have a Jesus-filled day.